Okay.
You ready? You run a test there? Testing? It's okay. Okay. Chapter 7. Illuminations Aloft. One last time, we gathered on the Louisiana, a farewell party. All was ready on all three vessels. Almost ready, that is, on vessels. Without belaboring the point, the mood was mixed. Next to the cold, the near eternal darkness was our greatest burden. So the theme of their little show, formerly ours, the theme was illuminations. First act, the curtain raiser, was up to the crewman from the Confederate Navy's Virginia, known to ignorant Yanks as the Merrimack. Bob Sanger also supervised. When the Old Dominion of Virginia had to give up her famed shipyards in Newport News and the roads, and all of Norfolk too, they had to scuttle the noble Virginia. Noble even if her engine never worked worth a damn. In a petty revenge, our petty officer and his crewman buddy lifted stuff. They were all shell-shocked. Both had been standing too close to the wall inside when one of the Monitor's Parrott guns connected on the casement near their head, leaving a dent in the Tredegar plate iron, melted bent rails mostly, and sending the solid shot straight up in the air. Their ears still rang off and on at the same times, they swore, especially around 3:33 p.m. when the shot had come. Anyway, no one else except the chronometer knew or cared when 3:33 was. More grog, lads. The gear which these two had lifted from the Yanks was thrown into the so-called Ben Franklin's locker, somewhere dirty. How they got the stuff to us, I don't know. Ask Speedy. That guy knew horses. It was wires, telegraphic gear, pulleys, more wires, clips and clamps, more pulleys, and something called a generator for telegraphs. When the dry cells got too wet, or vice versa. What the hell? On the dark, icy deck, all crowded with us, they got the weird contraption going. As Chitty puffed and chuffed with the smokestack belching, a belt from the beam to the generator made sparks fly all over. Then 4 burly sailors held 2 big bars of graphite for pencils. They held 2 big bars of graphite as gator clips and wires were attached. As they cried out, "Y'all watch yourselves now, ladies and gentlemen." One bar was cautiously brought nearer the other. Sparks flew 2 feet long. Vahini screamed. At about 6 inches came the brightest light any of us had seen in months. The 3 Kanakas were thrown back, hands over eyes, hissing like snakes. Sparks hissed on ice, and legs were burned. As the 4 sailors struggled to hold firm, the bars touched in a meltdown, and amid huge sparks, the rotor flew apart. Darkness, gasping, shouting, laughing. I'm glad Sanger was there to help those guys. We could have gotten hurt. They immediately dumped all the junk in the water. Damned men don't need, etc. As the smoke cleared, a dazed silence fell. The engine fell silent. Broken? No. Only briefly halted. Then, in the silence, we noticed our accompaniment. That night was clear. The black smoke rose straight up, a pillar of cloud by night. The northern lights were wildly gesticulating all over, in white, red, blue, and green. Also, patches of the sky, large white patches would flash on and off, and on again, like a chessboard. A note from Robbie Gordon. I've seen this myself also another time on St. Brandon's Isle at 45 degrees north latitude. That was right around July 4th, 1976. We watched for hours then, all night. Some of the lights were south of us. As a footnote, this is still Robbie Gordon speaking. It must have been a week later, because on the 4th, I was in the mall in D.C. with Tom and Joe the Fiddler, smoking hash and watching 33.5 tons of Chinese fireworks, with 1 million people all around. That's where I got my first teepee from Mercersburg, Merce. I had my mandolin and Tom had his banjo. Enough of this. I return you now to Jack Crack and his story. Then we heard it. A moaning, a singing, rather high-pitched, faint wailing, far aloft. The Aleuts who were there with us told us later that it was the Manitou, the great wolverine of the north. When he hunted, he growled and sang. By the lights he hunted. Klickitat was of the White Bear clan, Yakutat of the Orca clan, white and black. Their elders had seen them in vision, most powerful on land and sea. They were to carry the tribe's mana, as they say in Hawaii, or spirit, south. It was as a gift to their relatives. They bore many gifts, even their lives. The great wolverine was the symbol of the whole Aleut people. It was too sacred to be a clan or something like that. At some questions, they would look at one another and fall silent. Or the sound they heard. It was something they couldn't take except by having heard it. Something of the north alone. Later they saw the southern lights, the Aurora Australis, as it's called. I wondered what spirit animal ruled there in the south. Maybe the emperor penguin? Doomed, doomed. One reason the Aleuts liked us and trusted us was that no whales were being killed, though a few were seen. Click and Yak told us the whales could smell Aleut whalers. Why they did not avoid us, they knew not. The whales avoided the rebels. As we and Smith had agreed, no whaling would be done on the Vesta. The whaling gear and one whaleboat, but not the casks of oil, were taken aboard the Brilliant. But I'm ahead of myself. You said it. Back on deck, the main act was beginning. The day before, I had, I thought so cleverly, suggested to some rebels that we break into the powder kegs and make some fireworks. How they hooted. Sorry, Yank. How did you guys win the war anyway? We've got some bigger pop guns. Oh, how quickly I had forgotten about war. So Sanger and Speedy in the cutter and two Yanks in a whaleboat towed a big ice floe abreast of the Louisiana. Shh, don't call it that. Anyway, the range was about 400 yards, I'd say. The boats held fast that floe. The floe was 100 feet long or more. Two guns were unlimbered, starboard number 1 and number 2. They started with star shells, floating over ice and sea like angels. 11 white and then 2 red star shells. For Alabama and Louisiana, they said. I thought, for our 2 bleeding nations. Out of 13, the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air. The irony. Then the contest began. It was supposed to be Alabama versus Louisiana, but as Texans and Virginians complained, it turned into a free-for-all, each gunner shooting for the glory of his native state. The target was on the floe, a small cask of whale oil with a lighted wick. Winds were still calm, just perfect. Shots began. The floe became peppered like Swiss cheese. Big chunks flew. Hooray! But the little wick still flared, dimly, like a lamp. Every seal and bear for miles must have skedaddled. Maybe wolverines remained out there growling. No seals or Yanks or bears were hurt in the making of this tale. Then Sanger stepped up. to his baby, #1 gun. He polished her daily, but not lately. His keen gray eyes calculated. He resembled William Walker, the short gray-eyed filibuster of Nicaragua, a Confederate imperialist who was doomed and hanged, by the way. Ambrose Bierce told me, gray eyes see keenest. Sanger shot, bang! And the cask flew to pieces. With a new cask, more shots were fired, but grog and cold had done their work. The game grew old, but how to end it? Then came the captain. With his tongue between his teeth, he aimed #2 gun. They had few precious shells left, that is, the kind that explode. But the captain loaded one. His aim looked way off to me. But there was a big cleft in that ice floe. Bang! Boom! And the floe split in two. North and south, of course. The cask fell in the drink, and that was that. Nobody yelled, "One for Alabama." Nobody. 12 hours later, they left. As they slowly began to steam away, chuffing, the guns were proudly displayed. Then, at a rebel yell, 15 perfectly synchronized guns blasted a double broadside. As the echoes died away to a noble, tragic silence, one gun, #8 port, went off, pointed straight down, rocking the boat wildly to screams. Then the gun exploded. But the magnificent captain, as if unfazed as they picked up speed, shouted from the stern rail, "Happy New Year! Ho, 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 ho!" And they disappeared due south into the falling mist. Back into real history, not the kind told in this book. If only. One more episode should be included in this chapter of anomalies. Pay close attention, readers. The next night, 23 hours long, as we prepared to leave, a strange sight appeared. 8 big black rounded backs, right whales, came slowly from the west, up near to an island to our north. As I've said, whales were very scarce. The northern lights had never stopped. There were stars twinkling, few clouds, and low mist playing peekaboo. The 5 biggest whales stopped near the shore, 1/4 mile away. 3 more. Cows, perhaps? And was that a calf? They lingered well offshore. In between, ripples and phosphorescence indicated a probable shoal of small fish. Smelled or herring, perhaps. A few heads seemed to be bobbing in the ocean, too. What were they? Sea otter heads? Yes. But they seemed to be families, too. Some heads were very big and looked sort of seaweedy in the gloom. This was really strange. Stranger things came. 2 huge fin-back whales swirled into the glowing space between the floating black humps. They were feeding. Here now? They looked thin, the whalers said. They'd seen finners eat herring often, but not here and not at this season. And these, they seemed to move slowly, almost cautiously, as if they had calves. They did not vocalize except one huge belch, a thank you in whale talk. We saw something else. As someone swept the island beach with a spyglass in the eldritch lights. See any Aleuts? No. On the seaweed-strewn beach, some of the seaweed moved. 3 bunches of gray and olive floppy weed were on the beach at one spot. One moved, and a sort of a hand came out and picked a mussel from the dim gray-green rocks. It was a good glass we were looking through. Slowly, the other 2 began feeding also. They They were like human-sized fat toads or giant sea dragons, covered with cauliflowery and floppy, sargassum-like leafy stuff. Sure enough, give me the spyglass. Shh. Sure enough, the neck had a ruff that could have been gills. As the scouts fed safely, 5 more crawled out of the sea, all sizes. My God, my living, un-Darwinian God. Doomed, doomed, doomed! I saw it in a flash. This was a rest stop, a feeding station. Right whales had heard the fin whales from afar and cleared a spot, and then herded fish calmly into it. Meanwhile, as the finners ate, the otters and, shall we call them, mermen? The otters and mermen were safe to forage. The sleek fin whales were huge, probably a bull and cow. Pappy and Mammy had the whole flock crossed the open sea together, sharing food, scouting for each other. Or were the otters local pilots or chefs to bring sea urchins and abalones from deep down to trade for shellfish cracked by dexterous mermaid hands? Were dolphins also part of their tribe? Adam kept whispering in my ear, God is great. God is great. My hair stood on end. All kinds of possible connections and variations flashed across my mind. Once we could grasp that animals could communicate as well as we could, their intelligence would have to become obvious, and we should not be surprised at this sight. God is great. How many creatures were unknown to science and still doomed, and how few and scared these mer people must be. Yakutat whispered, the blues picked these fin whales for this job. The big ones are too endangered. I have thought this was not just a regular stop. The whales were thin. It was a special courtesy, maybe requested by the Aleut shamans, maybe not. It was to show that they saw us and to ask our help. Part 2, Southbound to Utopia. This part of the novel is dedicated to Dogman from Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. These beautiful fields, how green and flowered this field of battle, how true to nature before the thrust. Now that we can hear the thunder, does this mean in God we trust? Once so fine, this virgin land, never seen the likes of such. Bloodied soil and desecration, nightmare alley, it's all too much. Tender flowers, their smiling faces, trampled by the soldiers many. Then the fields will lose their beauty. Few flowers, less soldiers, if any. By Dogman Edslook, July 1863. I found this as I was filling in a mass Union grave. I don't know which body it came from. Chapter 8, Coalescence, Promising Rain. This is Robbie Gordon speaking. No, it's not. You can erase that. This is Jack McKay. Last night again, I woke up cold in the early a.m. Must have been near zero. No wind, though, but my stove had burned out. Cabin stove, that is. I kept thinking about the horses. All the horses. Not just the ones I missed from home, but the soldiers' horses also. knowing now, due to our parting vision, that animals are in touch, far more than we ourselves, perhaps, and also wiser, perhaps. Knowing then that the horses altogether had their own opinion of the great Civil War. To the horses, the slaveholders won the war. Consider the southern horses before the war, about 1850 or so, well pastured, curried, and ridden mostly belonging to the whites, and richer ones at that, but not all. Slaves obviously loved horses, their fellow servants. But even every po' boy from the swamps had his own faithful pony. And thus the entire Southern cavalry consisted, like Alexander the Great's army, of faithful couples of friends, long used to trusting one another. And having hunted together, both man and canny beast were well prepared, unfortunately, for war. Raw Yanks were gun-shy, and so were their horses. Even the CSA infantry Johnnies, pined for their horses at home. Now, in the North pre-war, of course, there were many beloved horses like these, like ours in Gettysburg. But the cavalry, by and large at least, did not own their own horses. And because of mass slaughter, conscription, and mass bungling, and McClellan's damn paperwork, horses and riders were switched around like slaves. Imagine being a poor northern horse, bought or simply taken, conscripted, with all the other young horses, but not the older ones, your parents and the wise elders, taken from somewhere in Michigan, say, or Missouri, and mixed with a lot of strangers' horses. Then on your back sits a blue-coat stranger, probably a good horseman, probably kind and needing a friend like the horse, but new and young and raw. Hay was almost always good, however. Many slaves ate well, too. They made more profit for their masters that way. So the northern horses rode into battle afraid and unsure, but loyal and brave as always, as the horse god commands them. They are like dogs the same way. So the Southern cavalry owned their mounts and loved them. If a man was killed in a fight, his horse went to a comrade whose horse was gone. Often it was to a brother or a friend, if possible, because the horse and man knew each other and needed a comrade from home. In other words, the Southern horses were treated with respect, if not quite as if created equal, but the Northern horses were treated exactly like slaves. Perhaps the mules may have felt differently, I wonder. Perhaps not being able to reproduce may have been known to them. They had no families to miss. As soon as the war was lost, the Southern horses were immediately enslaved, all given to new masters, except for Grant's understanding and mercy at the surrender, and a few incidents like the horse that we gave to our Louisiana lieutenant. Another incident from my family illustrates some of this, a lot actually. It was told me by Papa from his Chambersburg cousins. Their names weren't Gordon, I forget what they were. A note from Robert Gordon. This is true. I think this story was told to me by our beloved great aunt Charlotte Davison, a spinster, only sister of my Granny Gordon. Aunt Charlotte was a math professor at Wilson College for Women. And now, here's Jack again. It was 63. The rebels were leaving, riding past a big stone porch on a house downtown in Chambersburg, near the square. This was the year before Chambersburg was burnt. Was that Edgar Avenue or South Main? I don't know. Two spinsters and a widow were cutting and making bandages. As gray cavalry loped by, my aunts held out bandages to a wounded sergeant. He cussed them out a blue streak. His captain instantly wheeled and shouted, "Halt! Stop! You will dismount! You will apologize to these ladies and sir!" You will give your horse to these ladies. Now, trooper. The sergeant, weeping, obeyed, pleading for his horse to plow with back in Arkansas or wherever he came from. But no, Southern honor could be firm. Ah! My relatives pleaded, don't take his horse. We don't need the horse. But the captain insisted. A tired horse of a comrade loyally carried two to the swollen Potomac. This horse, a handsome Palomino stallion, had been trained to do tricks, like the steed that Buffalo Bill gave to Sitting Bull, and was a favorite buggy horse in Pennsylvania. How the horse must have pined for his dashing, hunting, jumping sergeant. The waters of Prince William Sound were uncannily calm that year, and we moved slowly but not reluctantly out of them southward. Soon westerly gales hit us, gusting a little and then picking up. We wished for steam, even like the lousy Anna. Our next port of call was Sitka. Everyone but me of our new crew didn't want to put in there, but I insisted and got my way. It was on the way to Frisco, and we needed fresh vegetables and supplies. I wanted to chant with the monks. First, we had to endure a storm. Not much of one, I guess. Only a force 6, they said. It was a force 3 for me. That means I threw up 3 times. Storms have been better described by others. I was no longer asked to go aloft after one try. Anyway, we were among islands. But sure enough, ice lurked in the fog among them. That westerly gale kept pushing us onto the rocks. The Brilliant ahead of us found an ice-free cove and signaled to us by Yankee semaphore, a light on their deck. But I don't know what lit it. There weren't any Edison filaments then. Anyway, they saved our ship and our lives. We made it to the cove, but we lost a cutter. We'd been towing her instead of hoisting her up to the 3 whaleboats stowed around the mainmast, because we'd hoped to scout the islands for safer passage. She even had 2 casks of oil strapped aboard in case she got swamped. Whale oil floats. But we had to let go of the tow rope. It fouled on the rocks, and a beautiful 12-man cutter went smash. As we edged out of the cove 12 hours later, we could see by spyglass it wasn't worth fighting back upwind to salvage her. I must say those whalers could handle that bark rig. The mizzenmast sail, the fore and aft trapezoid on its side, funneled the wind from the starboard quarter, that is, the rear, funneled the wind into the mainsail, pushing the ship forward instead of sideways. It was very neat. But the lack of keel and rudder control downwind was troublesome. She could yaw dangerously. I could be a good sailor if I didn't panic. I managed for months on my own proa. I had always headed for land in foul weather. Nearing Sitka, Manololo got sicker and sicker. The cold had resulted in many head colds, his not the least. Scurvy was almost on us. I guess the fish livers or kelp had held it off. At Sitka, thank God, there was a dismasted Mexican ship full of oranges covered with spots. We ate them. They were bought with Louis d'Ors. Lolo got slightly better. The orange vessel, which was painted red, had contracted to take the citrus to Prince Rupert to feed the northern Canadians. But a Ruski found her after a storm and towed her to Sitka. Her captain was still furious, gold or not. His honor was at stake. Not a group player. The Aleuts immediately unlashed their kayak and disappeared on familiar shores. They returned with herbs for Lolo and all of us. The 3 Graces were delighted and wrote down many notes. Yes, they could read and write. Didn't you think so? In Hawaiian, too. I got to see the monks. Kathy, the first mate, Claghorn, from the Essex, and 1 or 2 others came too. All 4 missionaries were there, Bibles and Russian dictionaries in their pockets. I knew little Russian then, but English versions of Dostoevsky, Iskov, Turgenev, and others had impressed me with the Russian Orthodox faith. A note from Robbie Gordon. Actually, I inherited a 17-volume set of Turgenev in English from my maiden great aunts, Matilda and Eleanor McKinnon Reed, around 1970. They knew I had majored in Russian literature. The beautiful gold-edged brown leather volumes were all from 1906, Isabel F. Hapgood translation. The edges of the pages were all uncut in the old style. They had never been read. Like much of Robbie Gordon's 12 volumes of Lincoln, which I also cut and read all of. Robbie had read some and made notes in light pencil. Studying the truth can be very lonely. I read all 17 volumes of Turgenev alone in my log cabin, which I built in West Virginia, in Greenbrier County. They were all portraits of Russians, peasants and country folk mostly. The ashes of those books, fathers and sons among them, are still in the ruins of that little pyramid roof cabin. Now back to Jack's story. The monks' chanting surpassed even my expectations, especially the bassos. I wished Captain McNaughton had heard them or taken part. We ate some cabbage, potatoes, and a slice or two of cucumber, all grown there and shared freely. Wonderful, heavy, brown and black rye bread and butter, even better than our rye at home. We left gold pieces under our plates like Jesse James. The incense was also wonderful to me, both the frankincense and the church service. The service was for the three magi. It was Epiphany. And even better, the rose incense which the monks used at their huts, etc. I purchased a good deal of it. I still have some somewhere. This rose incense was made on sacred Mount Athos in Greece, in Thessaly, actually, where no women had gone for centuries, and yet the rose is sacred to Mary. The Orthodox faith is a loving and forgiving one. As Alyosha Karamazov taught me, even a black sinner on his deathbed may be taken in by Jesus if he truly, truly repents. Amazing grace. We didn't have time for much theological talk with the monks. The four apostles were crestfallen, but the monks gave me a book, The Way of a Pilgrim, in English. After I read it, the missionaries did too. It was a cheap Russian printing full of mistakes, but no matter. The monks explained in pleasantly accented English that the book had recently appeared by an anonymous author from no one knew where. This was just before Alexander II freed the serfs. He admired Lincoln. The monks considered the book a gift of God. I do too. Is this book a gift of God? Probably not. Maybe a gift of gab, printed in Blarney Castle on Jameson's whiskey. This pilgrim of the book is a loving man who travels Russia with only a little bread sometimes, doing good deeds and studying his two books, the Gospel of John and a Russian prayer book. He learns of perpetual prayer. One should pray in one's heart at all times. This is a very beautiful, true story. His prayer was, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, a sinner. In the old Slavonic church tongue. Господи Иисусе Христе, помилуй меня грешного. I sometimes say this prayer yet, but I leave off the word sinner, greshno. How can one pilgrim alone be at peace? Unlike Ahab, he belongs to a loving group, the body of Christ. I learned only one chant. I didn't want to forget it all, so I went off alone to practice chanting. Gospodi pomiluj Lord have mercy. The monks also gave me a John Gospel, their favorite, in Russian. I still can't read it, in spite of the missionaries' dictionaries. But Robert could if he were here. By contrast, I saw the Russian fort. Worst, rustiest guns I ever saw. Some looked Turkish. Some were mismounted. I smelled vodka around them. So we sailed healthier on to San Francisco. The gold coins reappeared in Kathy's hands, and soon were passed out in all directions. She kept 10 or 15 of the 40 left for shenanigans in Frisco, but was determined to issue every person aboard a piece of a gold piece. Gleefully, with hammers and chisels, we issued everyone a third of a louis d'or, about $20, I guess. But just wait, she cried. The gold had been hidden in a hole gouged by me in the proa's hull, along with the boot black and some oakum wadding blacked over. The boot black? Well, Gordons never throw anything away. Honey had hung over the Louisiana's deck, concealing 40-some gold pieces, now that we had boat and gold back. Kathy had it bad, the eagerness to actually become not a ship under command, but an actual commonwealth. A bunch of tribes, even. Yankees, preachers, Hawaiians, Southerners, lovers, women, Negroes, Aleuts. She and I discussed the great law of the Iroquois, wherein small councils send representatives to larger councils, and women picked the male leaders and could depose them, like the Cherokee, like the Pueblo people. In Lakota ways, the women owned the lodges and pitched them. One group aboard had only one member, our Chinese cook. This was not the one who gave me the opium. That was on the Juno, bound for Java. Vesta's cook must have been a lonely old guy. A cook has to talk, but he didn't seem to enjoy it. He was just glum, usually. He had an opium habit, but Captain Smith kept him rationed. We thought in December to introduce him to the only Chinese man aboard the Louisiana, the old carpenter. We weren't sure if one spoke Mandarin and the other one Cantonese, or vice versa. We asked, but both acted like clams. The carpenter was as paranoid as the cook was glum, and he spoke as little as possible. We brought the cook aboard the warship and introduced him to the carpenter on top of a pile of wood shavings. Total silence. Goggling shock. The two thin-bearded, thin pigtailed oldsters eyed each other, circling like boxers. The carpenter was taller. They bowed and put their hands into non-existent wide sleeves, and then they began to talk. At first they were calm and formal, and then more rapid. They ignored everyone there. There were many around us. One brought out a paper and a pencil and began making rapid characters. The other looked it over, shook his head violently, and scribbled his own note. Soon the floor was littered with paper scraps as they argued, fists raised, stamping on papers. We had no idea what was discussed. Yanks and Rebs? The ball games? We had to pull them apart. Neither would talk. Thus ended our attempt to create another tribe for our commune, Chinese. The cook was so depressed he got off at San Francisco. He said he had relatives there. I reckon so. Why did they fight? We, me and Kathy, always philosophical, always naive, had just about decided before the spat that brown and black people were better at getting along. Not created that way, but what? Well, the Chinese, they were brown, so-called brown, but not all were slaves. They were rich and poor, just like Europe. That was it. They were too civilized. There is such a thing as too much tradition, if it's too rigid and written down in stone, as it were, like the Bible. The Iroquois Great Law was never written, as Franklin and Jefferson found out to their puzzlement. They even learned some Mohawk in 1754. No one could say, except the elders of each individual council fire, just what the law prescribed. It was flexible. Chinese, like whites, had codified nature to death. Pride, wealth, greed, same as the Wasichu. Means fat takers, Lakota for white men. Hawaii had some libertarian traditions, as I found later. It was a strange, contradictory, and rather benevolent oligarchy. In Hawaiian, the closest thing to a swear word that I know is haole, pronounced haole, meaning without breath. It's a nasty word for a white European or American. Polite Hawaiians, almost all, now as then, won't use the word, ever. I even saw a woman blush hearing it used. Of course, our cannibals from Molokai had used it all the time at everyone else. They wanted us to be howlies. People without breath were not people, so they could eat them, alive or dead. But see the concept? Only that without breath is alien, contemptible, dead. Thus, all that breathes is pono, in order, righteous or good. All life is relatives, family, even howlies. Fish breathe too, through gills. The two Chinese might have been arguing about Confucius, or because their ancestors had fought 100 years ago. Maybe the notes were genealogies. Anyway, they were no longer part of a group with a capital G. A group, we decided, after long smoking, was always a good thing. If it was a real group, that is, founded on love alone. Armies didn't count. They were founded on fear. Take away the officers and the orders, no more group. Nations, ditto. We don't need a border unless those people, the brown and black ones, are to be feared. Yanks don't fear Canadians, only because they are white. A family is a group. Even some dysfunctional families. A monastery is a group. A tribe, likewise. A club, a sports team. But sports fans, they don't really count. They don't help each other. Even strangers building homes in a wilderness form a group right away. We had both read Tom Paine, a note from Robbie Gordon, but I had not read Tom Paine until 3 years ago. Those two were ahead of me. Have you read him? Reader, put down this book right now and go read Common Sense. You'll understand the American Revolution after the first 2 pages, and maybe you'll understand this book too. Jack's speaking now. Paine knew kings rule only by fear, not by love. Except in Hawaii, perhaps. They do not rule by right, divine or otherwise. William was a conqueror. William the Conqueror was a thief, no more. And all his line, said Tom Paine. But ship's captains are still autocrats. Why? We ask. Is it because we must fear the sea, our mother? Is Ahab then evil? People want to be together in peace. We even know how, as little children do in a sandbox. We share money, pride, ownership of land, police forces, all feed the belief that I am alone, I need money, I need to fear. Ahab's crew is caught in the ultimate loneliness of individualism, constitutionally guaranteed selfishness. Go ahead, take my bread, you bastard, because I'm black. I'll get you for it someday. And war goes on. but a man, and even more a woman, who has a group to think about with love, cannot ignore the whole world. At least part of her striving must go to benefit her loved ones, even if it's only a bowling team. Was this why more women were not allowed on most ships? So, groups make peace. Next, to make our ship into such a group. I keep mentioning Ahab and Melville, so I might as well say it. I met Melville, depressed, in a small, shabby apartment, all alone. It was around 1885. He was ignored. His books were all unsold and unread. I think his late work, Billy Budd, was applauded while he was alive. I hope so. From him I learned another lesson, a bitter one, by inference. No matter how much truth and passion you can cram into your writing, people may disdain it. His Moby Dick is eternal. I told him so. He just nodded. Dostoevsky would have loved it. Maybe he did. He entertained with whaling lore and with his asides. Melville is my literary hero, I suppose. But we no longer, in 2013, have time to ignore truth. I am not talking about this book alone, but it is intended for a signpost. Wake up, people, and make war no more. Can you stand 3 more pages? All right. The morning after writing these words, this is Robbie Gordon speaking. The morning after writing these words, I forced myself to stop writing so manically as I have been and to pack my suitcase for my trip to Hawaii for 80 days. Around the world in 80 days. I am now enjoying the warmth of Puna District, Big Island, listening to the Hawaiian doves and eating 6 kinds of fruit from our yard. But as I was packing that cold morning, I grabbed my Bible, King James Red Letter Edition, to pack it. My sister usually doesn't have one. My thumb clumsily grabbed it. I thought, this is my reading. My thumb rested on the first book of Kings, chapter 21, verse 4, where it says, quote, "And Ahab came into his house, heavy and displeased, because of the word which Naboth the Jezreelite had spoken to him. For he had said, I will not give thee the inheritance of my fathers. And he," that is Ahab, "he laid him down upon his bed and turned away his face and would eat no bread." End quote. I had never read this before. Of course, I instantly stopped packing, though I was journey proud, as my granny used to be. Journey proud means to be nervous, insomniac, and anxious before a journey, a week maybe. I went to my concordance and read the entire life story of Ahab as told in 1 Kings 16:29 to 22:40. I swear to you, readers, by my family honor, that this really happened to me on this Sunday, December 9th, 2013. So who is Ahab? And who am I? Ahab is the king, the CEO, the one who cannot be a part of a group because he is alone. It's lonely at the top. Uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. The sword of Damocles hung over him. Most people dream of being king, but he has no friends except maybe other kings, and they all secretly hate each other. And who am I? I, Naboth, Jack, Robert. I will not sell to the government the inheritance of my fathers. Our time, our duty, our service, our honor. Not northern or southern honor, but the honor that respects the book that almost all of our parents presented to us, north and south, that teaches us not to kill, but to love our enemies. I don't know how we could have prevented our war But I know how we stopped the Vietnam War too late. Hell no, we won't go. And now I return you to Jack McGacky's story. We coasted southward slowly in light foggy weather, which kept us offshore mostly, but sunny at times. No sunbathing weather, but improving. Boats scurried back and forth from Brilliant to Vesta and vice versa, mostly from Vesta. Many of her soberer Yankee crew was beginning to see our affair for the quixotic jape on society it was becoming. Others came from Brilliant eagerly and curiously to see and join the wonder. Among these were three Frenchies, all Canucks, Acadians. We liked them and they spoke French for us betimes. One played fiddle, one guitar. More on them later. They formed a new tribe for us, indeed. We in Vesta also picked up Espy, Jaime Espinosa, from now somewhere in northern New Spain, New Mexico territory, of course, nowadays, near the notorious rebel pueblo of Taos. He'd been displaced and displeased when the blue-coat slave drivers stole his country and tried to enslave him. He was wounded at Taos in 1847, fighting Phil Kearny's U.S. troops beside the Taos people when their church was shelled with women and children killed. Taos and Espy surrendered. No bueno, gringos. Espy liked to drink and smoke, anything, but boy could he talk. We knew we'd need him in South America. He was always on the lookout for an espet with roving hands. He was short, round, bald, and of indeterminate age. Excellent drinking companion if you like that sort of thing. And I do. Yes, she, Catherine H. Hull, was determined to rake with her mother white bear claws to the bottom of the till of the C.H. Hull Company and distribute the fragments to her latest litter. That was to give our crew money, buy the ship outright from the Smiths, and sail, forever if needed, to find a land where people are created equal and are equally contented, and so are their animals. And once there, we were to give them all we had and join them if they would have us, quote, miserable sinners. Or, failing this dream, to return to Newburyport and face the music. From two palsied men and her children. As we passed the Russian River near and Fort Ross, near where the notorious British pirate Sir Francis Drake, that dragon, had laid up to count his stolen Spanish gold and wash the blood off the decks, the Aleuts told us a hilarious story of their greatest raid on Fort Ross. The Ruskies, starting around Lincoln's birth, 1809, had hired Aleuts to kill and skin sea otters. Iron kettles and knives did not spiritually replace the sea otters, which by 1824 were seen no more. Not commercially, that is. Of course, a few women and children, otters, survived, in spite of Aleuts and Ruskies. But the kelp declined because sea urchins ate them. Sea urchins are useless, spiny morsels to us two-legged people, but a favorite snack of otters. So with the otters gone, the kelp was gone, so fishing got worse. Fish love kelp. And the Aleuts got the full benefits of smallpox, syphilis, measles, and the flu. Anyway, the Aleuts had no love for Russians, and they had a way to hit them, mostly on a lark, and to show the other tribes how it was done. A huge jest. Now, the Aleuts were famous for long-distance raids. They'd go in a swarm of small one-man kayaks, with a dozen or so two-man kayaks, their special weapons and pride, and 4 or 5 big dugouts, 40-footers with lots of cargo space and high freeboard. The whole bunch would avoid the intervening totem pole tribes, the hordes of powerful Tlingits, Haida, Kwakiutl, Bellacoola, and others. They would do it by remaining well out to sea in a compact group. Scouts watched the coast slyly. Aleuts knew how to sleep and ship in a kayak. The dugouts each had a fire aboard in a bowl of stones forward, and many sinew and hair ropes trailing aft to tow sleeping Aleuts in kayaks. They all preferred their amazing, supple one-man craft, but went into raids with two-man boats also. There was one chief reason. A lone kayaker, when wounded, often drowned. One of a team of two could usually get his boat to a dugout where help was given. The two-man teams had to move in perfect synchrony, except sometimes when they moved in opposite directions, one left, one right, and so on. The amazing dance they performed, both in paddling and shooting their short bows perfectly together, put the Laosiana to shame. We asked how they did it. They grinned. We sing the same song. We had heard no song. They only sang when out of our earshot. Very old sacred songs, said Klickitat. This fleet of 40 or more vessels came south hundreds of miles in a week or more to scare the piss out of Fort Ross. Sometime 15 or 20 years before, Click and Yak had been there in their old kayak. They had a new one now. They'd made it to gift their southern relatives. Anyway, they approached slowly and cautiously in patchy fog. Perfect weather for them. Even guns worse than those at Sitka could kill, and this raid was intended to shame, not to kill or be killed. They were counting coup. There was nothing at Fort Ross that they wanted except meat, and they couldn't carry very much. Fort Rossia, or Russia, was the true name of this fort. It had huge square timbers, 30 feet or so high, black and bumpy, ancient looking, set so close that no light comes through, tarred black to repel fire and bugs. This place, with its lovely wooden onion-domed church, was simply a cattle and sheep ranch for food for Russians, sailors, and sealers, and any natives they'd been able to poison, cheat, and enslave lately. So here come the kayaks through the fog. The dugouts stay way offshore, safe. Russians, like ants, they run. Bell rings. Priests sing in panic and burn incense on the walls. A few guns are fired from the sea, and Russian, disheveled, drunken soldiers fire back with Napoleonic French muskets. The 400 cattle think that their doom has come, or their jubilo. All the cattle as one, followed by a few sheep, make for the fences at full speed. The fences go down. Two bold Aleuts had sneaked near and weakened them, and a few steers get broken legs. Scared monks and soldiers chase the cows. They're all gone, fast, into some impenetrable steep manzanita terrain. Do svitanya, Ruskies, moving on. The Aleuts laugh and laugh and laugh. A calf is tied near shore, bawling. Two daring kayaks land and pull the calf to sea into a dugout by its rope. Their only trophy. Nobody killed, none hurt. Nice fat brown calf, Guernsey. Wait till the Inuit and the Quackioodles hear about it. Best joke in years.